Hi everyone, welcome back to Joysticks. I'm your host, Amaterasu, and today we're having a little bit of a different show. We're going to be talking about a simulator, not a game, and of course we're talking about Microsoft Flight Simulator. No longer is the heralded cry, but can it run Crysis? Now the masses shout, but can it run Microsoft Flight Simulator? Simulator. Sorry. And the answer at Joysticks here is yes it can. Most of the time. So before we get into all of that, let's talk about what Microsoft Flight Simulator actually has to offer. As the name suggests, it is a simulator, not a game, that gives you access to a variety of aircraft, from jets to airliners to propeller planes. You name it, they've got it. Each of these follow the same principles, but have different quirks and controls that you need to be aware of. The most exciting features added are 3D models of terrain and buildings imported from Bing Maps, and live traffic data, so you can see planes that are flying right now on your map, or even encounter them in-game. And of course, the ability to fly anywhere in the world with seasonal weather and clouds that actually affect air currents. Which kind of makes sense because playing Microsoft Simulator is a bit of a bumpy ride, even when you have the ideal specifications. Speaking of specifications, let's get into the minimum recommended and ideal specs for Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. So for the minimum spec, we have an AMD Ryzen 3 1200 or an Intel i5 4460, 8 gigs of system RAM. For GPU, we have a Radeon RX 570 or an NVIDIA GTX 700, 2 gigabytes of video RAM, and 150 gigabytes of storage, and a 5 megabits per second internet connection. For the recommended spec, we have a Radeon RX 590, an NVIDIA GTX 970, 4 gigabytes of video RAM, 16 gigabytes of system RAM, and 150 gigabytes of storage, with a 20 megabits per second in connection. Now for the ideal spec, we have an AMD Ryzen 7 Pro 2700X or an Intel i7 9800X. For the GPU, we have Radeon 7 for Team AMD, probably because of the high bandwidth memory. On the NVIDIA side, we have an RTX 2080, it's a regular one, not the super, 8 gigabytes of VRAM, 32 gigabytes of system RAM, and 150 gigabytes of SSD storage. Obviously, the preference would be NVMe, but the ideal is any SSD storage. And a 50 megabits per second internet connection. Those are some fairly beefy specs, and we have all of them except for the recommended CPU. They recommend an i7 9800X, and we have an i7 8700K overclocked to 5 gigahertz. I think that'll be just fine. So what are we waiting for? Let's jump right into the video. When you first launch Microsoft Flight Simulator, you'll face some hefty loading speeds, even if you are using an SSD. Once in, you can pick a flight route right away, opt to compete in a challenge, or if you're not sure exactly how to fly a plane, you can jump into a training flight to learn some of the more basic controls.
Welcome to flight training. I'm your instructor, Captain Molina, but you can just call me Jess. This session, we'll get started with some basic controls. Sound good?
So, to put our ideal spec system through its paces, we opted to test the performance at 1440p in ultra, high, medium, and low settings, followed by 1080p in ultra settings as well. First thing to note is that no matter what settings you are on, taxiing and takeoff and landing will have a hit on performance, at least from our testing. Flying low in any area will also do the same. The farther you get away from the ground, the smoother your performance will be. If you opt to fly with a view in cabin, you're likely to have a minor hit in performance as well, no matter how high you fly. Have a look at these clips at 1440p at ultimate, high-end, medium, and low settings. Ultra averages at around 45 frames per second once in flight and dips to the high 30s when taking off or approaching to land.
High-end flirts with 60 FPS quite a bit once you're up in the air, but never quite manages to be stable, so expect it to be in the middling 50s. Switching to medium and low nets you a nearly stable 60 frames per second on both with VSync enabled as it has been for all scenarios. With decent results on the mid to low end for 1440p, we expected some greater gains in 1080p, especially at ultra settings. So that's what we did next. We were, however, unpleasantly surprised to see the results were similar to our ultra settings at 1440p. The resolution shift downwards didn't affect performance positively for some reason. I would love to tell you why, but then I'd probably be lying. But hey, now you know what's up, so maybe you can figure it out and give me the lowdown in the comments below. Overall, Microsoft Flight Simulator is playable, but to avoid sudden dips in performance even with the ideal setup, you may be better off locking your frames per second to 30 with VSync for smooth performance so you can focus on learning how to fly planes instead of how your FPS count keeps dipping up and down below 60.
Hey guys, hope you liked that video. If you enjoyed it, make sure you smash that like button. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you in the next one. Peace.